We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this project is created, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We would also like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Settle down and gather round for another tale. In the world of Nuadha, where time has carved and cultivated a magical utopia of wonder, a small group of adventurers unlock the deep mysteries of the land, its people, and themselves. Welcome to the Down Under Dungeon podcast.
Dearest Susanna, you always said that every story finds part of its end at its beginning, and we certainly came full circle when our old friend Yellen stared through the portal carved between the Shadowfell and the material plane, flanked by her Bloodraven guard. Her vision and ambition had brought her this far, she claimed, with the belief that she would see it all to its conclusion. At least she was kind enough to explain everything before dealing with us. She told us her story of the short-sighted vision of the Priory and Charity's shared belief that the wrong gods had been prioritized when they were bound to the material plane. She revealed that she'd struck a warlock pact with the Lady of Rain, aiming to correct the imperceived balance of power and banish the gods of the Priory to the Shadowfell, using Europium and the Moongate to do so. She thanked us for giving her everything she needed, for finding the Moongate, for giving her the city, and for providing her worshippers, giving her the influence required. All that remained was a way to open the portal, and we handed that to her as well. Now she had nothing left to do but wipe out the newly crowned Lady of Shadows and establish herself as the savior rather than the conqueror. I apologize if I missed any details. I was mostly focused on trying to hold my soul within my body as the Blood Ravens rushed us, continuing a fight we'd fled from the first time. None of us had forgotten the pain they'd already caused and how deadly this fight could be. Amidst Phoenix fire and shadows, using gifts from those who'd helped us along the way and the power we'd gathered on this journey, we fought. I saw my friends move and act in a way that truly showed how far we'd come, but battles are hard won, and Lysandra fell to a blood raven, her life slowly being drained away. I'd been trying to stay calm, focusing on remaining present, but when I saw her limp body fall and Denny emerge from the shadows where he'd been hiding, taking aim at the battle and scrambling to her side, seeing her pain and his panic was enough to snap the frayed strands that had kept me grounded. I couldn't get to them. I couldn't move. My time was up. Everything kind of becomes a little hazy after that. Frida, Feng's friend from the Order of the Eternal Flame, pulled herself through the portal to offer assistance, healing Feng as he called the Gloom Legion to the Lady of Shadow's aid. But alas, Lysandra fell to the Blood Raven's blade. Frida, hesitantly, and perhaps against her better judgment, brought her back with the last of her strength, inspiring Feng to transform into a glorious ball of light, a beacon of hope in the shape of the Eternal Phoenix. The tide began to turn. Lysandra rose to her full height, striking down the Blood Ravens and claiming the power in her heart as Feng tore out Yellen's throat, silencing her message and leaving his words of retribution and hope to echo across the throne room. Then it goes dark, and for the first time in a long time, Lady Louis is undeniably human. As her spirit relinquishes its hold, the puppet is finally severed from its strings. It is silent here. She cries tears of unsaid goodbyes as she thinks of those she has left behind in a story that is now theirs to continue. She doesn't move for a long time, staring into the darkness, terrified of the consequences that might await her in this afterlife, and perhaps more scared of the desperate, wild anger within her that still screams that her time has not been enough. The longer she sits, the calmer she becomes, slowly allowing anger to shift to acceptance. She sits for minutes, maybe hours, but as her soul adjusts to this place, she begins to realize that the darkness is not absolute. Its form is a familiar tableau that she has witnessed once before, all that time ago in the heart of her old city of Hermitage. She is, once again, cradled in the arms of Nonina, held and lifted by the boughs of the ancient olive tree herself, the burden of her aged body lightening. With the rustle of leaves and the hum of dragonflies, she opens her eyes to hundreds of thousands of multicolored lights that dance and dart about this place. The soft buzzing of noise in this transitional space slowly begins to distort and separate, becoming voices, shouting, giggling, conversing. The lights drift together as if opening a window into a blinding, glorious light. She moves to stand, rising easily with no pain or struggle, and smiles, taking quiet joy in how easy it is to move without a physical body or the hindrance of age. The light is warm as she begins to walk. Louis rises upon a slight incline, peering out from a peaceful hilltop. Balmy summer air greets her with a slight breeze, carrying the sound of laughter and joy from a distant place. Her hands at her sides brush what feels like grass. It is soft and smells of chamomile and peppermint. She looks down, and the ground below her erupts into a cacophony of sage and wildflowers. As her eyes adjust, she gazes off into the distance to behold an enormous wood, stretching as far as the eye can see until it melts into the blazing light of an eternally setting sun. Despite the vista and its calming influence, within her there remains a persistent, niggling voice that plagues her with doubt, longing to return, even if only for a moment, to see through her unfinished business, the last dregs of the fear that she hasn't quite let go, but a hand rests on her shoulder, stopping her from moving and holding her steady. She turns slowly at the touch, hoping beyond hope it is who she thinks it may be, and tears form in her eyes. Standing there, short and sweet, glowing in the sunshine yellow of her soul, is the most familiar face smiling up at her. A gnomish woman, her hair salts and pepper grey, curly and kept tight in a neat knot at the base of her neck. Her face is round and peppered with freckles and smile lines, a gap-toothed grin spread wide. She is dressed as she was in her last moments. She wears sturdy boots and a worn thin sweater, patched together again and again by her wife. The navy blue threads shot through with faded and frayed multicolored dye. She stands shorter than Louis by a few inches, her neck craned slightly upwards to look into her eyes, the sparkle of laughter still visible even after all these years. "Susanna?" Louis asks, as if a prayer rather than a question. "Hey, honey, I got your letters," Susanna answers, smiling with a cheeky wink and reaching out to hold her hand. Louis grabs it, holding on tight with the grip and will that first defied death itself. "I've missed you every day," Louis says, and Susanna smiles. And that was the story of Lady Louis. But of course, ideas and relationships can span well beyond one mortal lifetime. Many still remembered her in the lands of Nuadha, her tales, her songs, her stories. When Louis had first left Hermitage, she had been looking for the lost ones, the ones who had left and whom she'd lost track of, forging their own way outside of her guidance and mildly overbearing nature. Though she had only found one on her great adventure, there were many others who had lived full lives outside the small walls of the commons without her. But life can also be cruel, and there were many who did not make it very far from the warmth of the commons, that had their light extinguished perhaps too soon. Even if they all had run from her well-meaning help in their life, she had never held a grievance against them. A part of her had always wished them the best in their freedom and their choices, living lives for themselves on their own terms, as she herself had always done. Within the city of Hermitage itself, Angela, the satyr she had trusted to run the commons in her absence, worked with several other small communities to bring new life to the worn-thin infrastructure. They expanded beyond the small sewers and aqueducts, creating an undercity that rivaled the burgeoning elite in the streets above. The Undercommon, as it was now referred to, became a commune that catered to all those desperate and destitute. Indeed, with the arrival of druids and farmers, wizards and tinkerers, the landscape was transformed. The dank and dingy culverts and sewer systems were reworked into vibrant hydroponic farms, a sprawling metropolis of innovation and renewal. Arcane and artificial light sources brought decorum and decency, banishing any hint of the dark underbelly that once sought to corrupt the souls who dwelt there. The Undercommon became a desirable place to live, with an identity and culture all of its own, a place that listened and respected the lives within it. It never once bowed to the pressure of those who wished to gentrify or push out those in need. During her time, Lady Louis had been the greatest protector of that feeling, and after she was gone, there were those who took her task to hand more voraciously than others. The old Jarl, with his ostentatious and mildly contentious political past, had taken it upon himself to safeguard the Undercommon from those who would seek to supplant their ideals. Taking on a role as both guard and informal ambassador to the authorities above, Scruff became a familiar name in the mouths of all who dwelt there, as a protector, elder, and mentor. He became the Marshal of the Undercommon, commanding his own brigades of deputies tasked with the safeguarding of the people, in memory of his own sworn protector, Constantine, who had given him everything through her own selfless sacrifice. As he grew older and his younger deputies began to take over his duties, he found himself entranced by wanderlust. Following in his old mentor's footsteps, he travelled the width and breadth of the continent, and perhaps a plane or two in between, but his solace and purpose always remained in the Undercommon. Even in the land of shadow, upon the willow-decked shores of Cinder Harbour, Louis's legacy took root. A circle of dream druids established there, reading the pattern of stars and hearing their whispers from behind the moons. They committed themselves to the art of soul-tuning and used their skill to cleanse the land of jaded spirits and evil influences. They became a profound force for good, an asset in establishing a new order in the tumultuous Umbra Isles. It would give the old lady comfort to know that after her death, the tapestry of people left behind would continue the legacy that was passed down to her. They learned the lessons she never quite could, that things are meant to change, to be broken and fixed, that sometimes the best things come from the most broken moments. Not everything can be made right, but things will continue regardless. This truth is passed down, as lessons always have been, through the joys and sorrows of song, poetry, and story, the only truly immortal thing. And so, Lady Louis was at peace without having said goodbye, even to those closest to her, the Wellspringers. While she attempted to teach and guide them through the world as she had done so many times before, it was they who taught and mentored her. Not only were they witnesses to her story, but they were a deeply entwined part of it, present for her failures, triumphs, and shortcomings. They would continue onwards with the reminder that age does not necessarily equate to wisdom. and even the most well-meaning person can be deeply and hubristically flawed. But the three remaining heroes would continue their story, becoming legends in their own right, whether from a throne of shadow, the crackling inspiration of firelight, or simply the respite and comfort of a hearty stew. And perhaps she'll see them all again one day, when it's their time and their story has ended. Or maybe when their story is truly just beginning. But that's their tale to tell, and Louis is done trying to tell it.
After Denis helped slay the evil Mother Yellen, he travelled back to Nuadha with his remaining friends, asking many questions like, "Who was it, min lady?" and "Why did we hate her again?" All the while preparing new, strange soups with suspiciously pious meats. After saying his farewells to Feng and Lysandra in the frontier city, Denis set off for Bientiorum to free his father. The details of how he actually managed to do this are a bit of a mystery to most. Some say that he returned with a large pile of gold to buy Camille's freedom. Some say that he led a small army of goblin goons from the south to the Nightingale estate, liberating their brethren with righteous fury. And still others say that Pud simply walked in the front door, befuddling the guards who were either unable or unwilling to catch him, leaving him to waltz out with Camille hoisted upon his golden shoulders. Regardless of the method, Denis broke the chains of his father's servitude, escorting him to a life of freedom for his remaining years. Together they travelled Nuadha, setting up shop for a few weeks here and there, selling their soups and beguiling their patrons with stories of Denis' adventures. With their proceeds, and perhaps a few favours called in, Denis was able to buy a small permanent shop and accompanying apartment in Feldspar. Having gleaned the correct permits, Denis named the establishment Lady Gwelkin's Soup Hollow. There, Camille would spend the rest of his days with his son and his soups. Camille confessed to Denis that these final years were the best of his life, and died shortly thereafter, with Denis holding his hand and a peaceful smile falling across his face. And, in the great goblin tradition, Denis prepared his father into a hearty broth of his own tears and served him at the funeral. After the passing of his father, Denis turned his attention to other matters. The lucrative profits of his shop enabled him to make Lady Grelkin's Soup Hollow a gold coin charity, where all could receive a hearty meal and fresh ale for a meagre donation. Feeling the itch for adventure once again, Denis left Pud to run the establishment. Side note, Pud went on to become something of a celebrity chef in Feldspar. He was known for his desserts, his hairline trigger, and his raw sexual magnetism. Denis, however, turned his mind to the mission of the Halligast. He knew he had left much unsaid, and he sought to right his wrongs. Fortunately, the Halligast expedition to the Twin Moons had been successful. With Lysandra as the Lady of Shadowfell and keeper of the portal, Captain Holly was able to construct a nexus on the Blue Moon itself, allowing easy movement to the lunar frontier. A small burgeoning community had sprung up there, funded by the discoveries of lucrative arcane materials as well as flora and fauna upon its surface. After he arrived on the moon, Denis went in search once again for his lost love. He asked around at many an up-and-coming tavern, finding only rumours of the halfling pirate rogue. He was even reunited with Lidrin, his once travelling companion. Denis expected anger, potentially even revenge from the Mind Flayer, but Lidrin seemed nothing but overjoyed to see Denis once again. They wrapped him up in a tentacly embrace and filled Denis in on how the colony was planning to move to the moon's surface and was building their own separate homestead. Isolated, yes, but by choice. They would be welcome within the community. Or community, Lidrin joked, clearly quite pleased with themselves for that one. Lidrin also shared that the last that they had seen Plimp, she had set off to the lunar plains to live as a hermit there. Denis, feeling renewed, thanked Lidrin and set off once more. He traversed lunar craters and battled with outer space beasties. But Denny soon found himself thoroughly and completely lost. Turns out, the normal methods of navigation and tracking don't hold up without gravity, or a magnetic core, or the standard sun cycle. His rations wearing thin, Denny began calling into the ether, "Plimp! Oh Plimp, where are you?" as the panic slowly set in. What if she simply was not here? What if she had moved on, and the tales of her exploits are but the remnants of a long-gone traveller? As hope began to wane, Denny was almost ready to turn back, until he noticed a strange iridescent glow reaching from the maw of a moon cave. Desperate for food, drink and rest, Denny braved the cavern. As he stepped inside, his eyes widened at the sight of an almighty treasure hoard. Jewels of all varieties, emeralds, rubies, diamonds, all easily the size of Denny's head. A plethora of golden coins spilling from chests filled with chalices and crowns. And standing before an enormous cauldron, big enough to fit the two of them in it comfortably, Denny saw her, Plimp, her face buried in Lady Grelkin's cookbook. Denny fell to his knees before her, half in awe and half in sheer exhaustion, begging forgiveness. Plimp, who was now an administrator of the colony, and who was actually just researching potential new sites for colonial towns, rejected his apologies, but would not allow the poor hobgoblin to die in her charge. She gave him rest and respite, and once he was strong enough, she escorted him safely back to the colony. It took some time, some convincing, and a lot of favours, but eventually, Denny was able to regain Plimp's trust and her affections. He then spent the remainder of his years upon Myella, adventuring with the scouts of the lunar community and helping sustain civilization there. This included the shepherding of the illithid colony of the Wereworm tunnels to the new frontier for a better life. Like Plimp, many of the Mind Flayers were initially resistant to Denny's apologies, having shared in Lidrin's thoughts and feelings of abandonment at his hand. But in time, they too forgave and even befriended the goblin cook. Denny and Plimp made quite the pair. They were both very busy, of course, but they found a lot of time for one another. And after much pestering, Plimp finally agreed to marry her hobgoblin. It was a spring wedding that you could hardly tell on Myella. They had agreed to not have children, both shivering at the memories of Pud. But Denny still wished to pass his teachings on to someone. So Plimp helped him set up a culinary school for goblins on the moon, where Denny could instruct a new generation of chefs in the ways of goblin cuisine, assuring that his legacy, the legacy of his father, and that of Lady Grelkin, would live on forever. While he battled and fought alongside immortals constantly, age is but the cruel master of goblins, their lifespan significantly shorter than that of their fellow man. As Denny entered his 40s, he began to realise that his days of scouting were at an end, and he sought to rebrand himself as a cultural attaché, an ambassador of the arts. And though he enjoyed his singing immensely, it was only under the threat of soup poisoning that his audiences would indulge his delusions of musical talent. The moon is mysterious and full of wonder, but time does not stand still upon the lunar surface. And many years later, at the ripe old age of 55, Denis Gobert kissed his beloved Plimp for one final time. He pleaded with his wife that she too would eat him upon his death. With a hybrid sob/giggle, she politely told him that he could go and get fucked, as tears trickled down her cheeks. And Denny chuckled a weak laugh with his final breath. Plimp was later once again brought to tears by the sheer size of her husband's funeral. Though she held it on the moon, many made the journey from Nuadha to say their farewells to Monsieur Gobert. Though she assured everyone that all food and drink was perfectly safe to eat, most of the people there had known Denny, and most of the people there had learnt, including Lysandra and Fang, not to trust someone when they tell you that a soup contains no internal organs. Shortly thereafter, a pair of bronze statues were commissioned in honour of the small hobgoblin who had once felt that his life was unassuming and insubstantial. One was placed in the lunar colony, the other in Feldspar, both forever immortalising the little scamp for generations of cannibal cooks to come.
The months after the party defeated Belial and Yellen proved to be some of the most difficult work they had done. For Feng, it included a lot of travelling around the continent, tending to the consequences that he and his friends had inadvertently caused around Nuadha. He was now the emissary of Chuan, after all, and had a lot to live up to. First, he went back to Lalludrud to counteract the schemes of Yellen and make sure that those that had helped them were properly taken care of. This included Arnold and Irene, who saw a boom in their business as mantelopes became highly coveted and exotic. It became fashionable and practical for rangers and druids to use them as mounts and companions. It probably helped that Irene gained prowess with a dagger and threatened anyone who was caught mistreating them. Feng even made sure that those that were manipulated or at risk in Lalludrud were okay, like Blaine and the other homeless children who ended up starting their own druidic circle in the city dedicated to the sun, and Darby the little Jerboa folk becoming a ranger and tour guide for the booming tourism industry. Feng was also asked to oversee the creation of a council for the city that would be made up of 3 individuals. Instead of having one Jarl, it would be their responsibility to monitor the city. This allowed the diffusion of concentrated power, meaning one individual, like Yellen, could not take over again. Feng did not handpick the members, merely making suggestions that each council member should specialise in an area integral to the functioning of the city, like Vanessa, who studied death, or Irene, who knew the ins and outs of trade. This approach didn't sit well with the other Jarls under the Concord Dawn, and some of the other major cities were quite hesitant to deal with Lalludrud at first. Over the years, though, the system proved to work more efficiently and ended up being adopted by all of them. The councils would meet twice a solar cycle to collaborate. They realised if they weren't united and chasing progress for the sake of progress, it would only create more issues for the people they govern. He made sure that the Pension Prospecting Company was disbanded and that resources like europium and many other rare materials and artefacts from the Apani discovered later were properly monitored by the new leaders in the city. Feng had seen the corruption of uncontrolled profit in this land and wished to return the natural resources back to the people who benefited and lived off of it. Feng didn't want to spend too much more time in Lalludrud though, as it reminded him too much of his first friend outside of the circle, Quigwellen. Rumour has it that before Feng left, he passed by a particular demiplane for some games of Liar's Dice with Miss Miranda. No one can confirm how much time he actually spent there. Some say Promi had to fly in there and drag him out by the scruff of his neck. Passing by Feldspar as often as he could, Feng always liked to drop into the grotto there to check on the Occamy and the golden apple tree that his magic beans had grown. The grotto became a haven for many different druidic circles of the sea, sky, and earth. Feng thought at the time the Occamy egg just helped him get a little bit more intelligent, but what he wasn't thinking about was what the tree and beast themselves represented to those who visited. The idea of flying and being free, to come and go whenever one chooses, moving from place to place. The tree itself acted as a golden beacon over the harbour, something for those out at sea to look toward in a time of need. As an ulterior purpose, his frequent visits also enabled him to keep a close eye on the Priory of Skye, as he could not be sure that there were no more followers of Yellen and her zealous ways, and did not want her becoming a martyr for others to rise to power in retaliation. In true Feng style, he delayed speaking to the Order of the Eternal Flame for as long as he could. Facing Krishna again was something that felt daunting even to him. But he had to stand up for himself, and to him. To tell him that he followed their teaching every step of the way. That they were the ones that never allowed him agency in his own decisions. It was only when he took the flame into his own hands was he able to control his own fate, and ironically, the fate of everyone else as well. He harbours no ill will toward Krishna though. A leader is bound to make mistakes. They just have to be willing to listen and learn. Feng hopes that if he ever finds himself in a similar situation, he will allow his followers the chance to prove themselves. After their confrontation, Krishna stepped down, finally admitting fault. The circle ended up disbanding, spreading out across Nuadha, and creating many little colonies all over the continent. Little flickers of flame waiting to ignite the passion of those who would seek them out. In Carefrossia, he spent some time with the Rhinebeard children, who were still calling themselves the Frigid Flames, to make sure they truly understood the properties of fire. The way fire works with the ice and cold is a delicate balance. Feng had to make sure they never accidentally melted the city, like when he burnt down the grotto in Hermitage. His advocacy spread further than this, however, convincing the Beastmaster there to explore a different side to animals. He set up an animal sanctuary, and Lord Bonebreaker connected them with the Four Eyes in Feldspar to begin a fledgling research and conservation centre for the beasts and monsters of the tundra. Over the next few decades, the Frigid Flames became master iron wroughers, and in their mastery found an understanding of fire and creation. The Rhinebeards became renowned across Nuadha in their molten metal sculpture work and ability to weave precious metals into textiles and armour. And so, Feng spread the Phoenix Flame across Nuadha like he promised. Working alongside the Frigid Flames, he commissioned many new lanterns, entrusting them to acolytes of his vision to travel far and wide. Feng had come to terms with the fact that he was not a dictator of how the flame was to be used, but instead an example of the values it embodied: life, death, destruction, and renewal, making sure the wildfire druids of the future would be able to hold those accountable who abused the order of things. Of course, over the years there were those that strayed, using the fire for evil means that demanded his intervention. One druid, in a desperate attempt to cure himself of a pestilent disease, consumed the eternal flame to grant himself eternal life. Unwittingly, this act created a feverish plague that ravished the common folk and farmers of Hermitage. He also had to remove a pesky tinkerer in the bowels of the industrial zone of Cape Rin, who had attempted to reverse engineer a flame stolen from a druid's lantern, creating an artificial eternal flame that nearly burned down half the city. Feng continued to monitor Nuadha for many years, but naturally his focus and curiosity, like Merle before him, turned to the surrounding plains and realms. He made sure to travel to Shadowfell when he could, to not only aid Lysandra in establishing her new vision, but also visit Pud the Fourth, or Pudforth as it was now known, the great willow treant that grew from one of his magic beans. Those very beans had brought him and his party a number of gifts throughout their journey, as well as their biggest challenges, namely the sword that helped solidify Belial's connection to Lysandra in the first place. Feng figured that he didn't need them anymore, and tried to bury them under the willow as a symbolic goodbye. He couldn't have predicted that the mycelium network of the myconids that had fused with the tree would also fuse with the beans and allow the willow to start producing a great number of them. He decided to leave them, not wanting to tamper with nature any more than he already had. Maybe they would be the beginning of someone else's story one day. Feng's next stop was the Fae Court. They were the ones who had sent the original Phoenix, and while Feng wouldn't even be a druid of fire if that didn't happen, there was still a lot of destruction and devastation that had created wounds that spanned lifetimes and continents. Feng wasn't trying to be the arm of justice for something that had happened a millennium ago, and while he couldn't heal everyone, there was a distinct someone to whom he was indebted to. Waganju's life was nothing but torment and fear for what he had done, and so Feng took him to the court to confront the arbiters of his misery. In discussion with the Fae Court and a desire to counteract their ancient plots and trickeries, Waganju was permitted to live out his eternal life in the Summer Court. The confrontation was therapeutic for all involved, helping Waganju realize he doesn't need to show his brute force and power to justify his form, especially in the company of the whimsical and cheeky Fae. Feng was glad that while Waganju may not be redeemed in his own eyes, he could move past his misery and live in comfort. But who knows? Maybe one day his help will be needed again to save the world. While on his sabbatical in the Fae Court, Feng met as many of the High Fairies as he could to honour his old friend Quig. They loved playing tricks, and Feng was a little bit too gullible for his own liking. He had gotten better at dealing with these kinds of things in his travels amongst the people of Nuadha, but the Fae proved an even greater test. Regardless, the Fae Court and the land of Nuadha were inextricably linked, and in order to avoid more miscommunication, he believed he must bridge the gap. Mel's advice continued to ring in his ears, and he believed if Nuadha wanted to continue growing and developing, they had to expand their reach. Feng travelled wherever he could, the elemental planes and the chaos that surrounds them, the ethereal plane and even the astral plane. Feng quickly realised this job would be one that takes many lifetimes. But he was glad for the purpose. When all was said and done, Feng's only loose end was the crew of the Halagast. Only, they never returned. Holly had decided to set up colony there upon the blue moon Mayella. Interestingly, Feng had joked about leaving this all behind and wandering the land alone after the final battle, like he thought Mel was doing, and could not resist a tinge of jealousy for Holly's adventure. Once he was satisfied in his duty to Nuadha and its place in the pantheon of realms, maybe he then too could find new adventures upon the moons. Until then, the emissary of Tuin and his phoenix Promi were bound in his duty, looking up above the crackling campfire each night to gaze at the twins, waiting for the day he might travel there and reminisce on his adventures with his first family, the Wellspringers.
It was over. Lysandra stood motionless, inhaling the cool, dark air curling around her like an old friend. The weight of battle had lifted, yet a strange stillness remained within her. Yellen, her nemesis from the beginning, was defeated. Her father, Belial, was vanquished. The questions that had haunted her for so long had been answered, not in the way she had once hoped, but answered nonetheless. For the first time, the path ahead was hers alone to shape. Embracing the birthright as the Lady of Shadows, this land was hers now, not just the throne, not just the power, but the burden of leadership itself. Victory was only the first step. In the days and weeks that followed, Lysandra found herself facing a challenge unlike any before, one that could not be subverted by her shadow or brought to justice with her sword. The people of Shadowfell were wary, conditioned to be ruled by fear and omission, but Lysandra had no desire to be her father. She decided to share the burden of renewal with others. While resistance lingered, there appeared to be an apparatus of people building under the nose of the former lord, ready to lead change once he had been removed. The Order of the Sheath, led by people such as Dravna and Anne-Marie, began the transition of lifting the veil of Belial. Their underground society had quietly taken root, with labourers, artisans, and scholars amongst them building networks and biding their time. Through quiet defiance and self-sufficiency, they had kept the dream of a new Shadowfell alive. The damage and destruction left in the wake of Waganju became an opportunity to recreate Caldera City. Stonemasons reworked the large esplanades, druids were summoned to paint lush gardens to remove the smoke and smog from the air. Waganju themselves spilled down the lip of the caldera, down the side of Mount Admonition, all the way to the bay below, creating in their wake a new, smooth road of igneous rock, reconnecting the once segregated capital to the wider isles. And speaking of the wider isles, Fumatan was liberated from their indentured work. They were given fair pay for their labour, and initiatives were started to curb the wanton violence and dangerous mining operations. To the south, Dravna expanded ghost wheat production, and the cultivation of other fruits and vegetables that could grow in the near darkness. Clerics of the Order of the Sheath created obelisks of deterring energy in the far western Wereworm Barrens, keeping the mighty creature at bay and allowing for new towns and villages to take root in the foothills. The putrescent woods fell under the protection of the Lady of Shadow, leaving the Myconid druids to their work in peace to rewild the desolate trees. In fact, the druids themselves assisted the new lady in her pursuit of charity, who had fled after the destruction of her accomplice, mentor, and master, Yellen. For years, Lysandra led forays into the putrescent woods, the barrens, and the phantom marshes in an attempt to locate her. While never found and presumed dead, it always played on Lysandra's mind, a concern that Charity could rise again with followers and a singular vengeance. The willow Feng had planted on the shores of Cinder Harbour had become a beacon. The land, long shrouded in darkness, began to glow, not with sunlight, but an eerie luminescence of mushrooms, fungi, and algae that sustained a thriving community on the coast, attracting visitors and settlers from across the land. Lysandra had once feared the darkness would consume her. Now she was shaping it into something new. Shadowfell had been dismissed for too long, seen as a cursed place, its people cast as villains. That perception would change. The creation of the portal in the depths of the covered keep was designed as a waypoint of war, where troops would be sent to conquer the lands of Nuadha and punish the Fae for their transgressions. But Lysandra would see it used differently. The keep became a trade nexus for her realm, connecting it to the Rhinebeards of Caerphrosia, Cape Rin's tinkerers, and the Feldspar ports. Umbra Isle's grain, lumber, ore, and ale became sought after in the lands of Nuadha, and in return, budding arcanotech and precious materials were ferried back to assist the development of her realm. Indeed, many years after Holly's successful venture to the moons, a waypoint was able to be created and tuned to the Shadowfell portal, creating a bridge to the Blue Moon, Mayella, and the burgeoning settlement there. Scholars, explorers, and rangers flocked to the Umbra Isles, using it as a home base to set out on expeditions to the moons themselves through the portal. In truth, the historic separation of Shadowfell from the Concord Dawn became a blessing and not a curse, as outside the constraints of Fey law written centuries ago, the land became a place of opportunity, fresh starts, and innovation beyond the confines of Jarls and kings. The portal also had its uses in liberating the material plane. By connecting Lysandra back to the lands of Laludrud, she was able to deal with the vacuum and treachery left behind by Yellen. She helped Feng install the Council of Elders in the city, one which understood the corrupting influence of precious materials and had felt the sting of a leader unable to overcome it. Vanessa the Mortician, Frida the Old Flame, and Irene the Armadillo Folk became a triad that shepherded the city through the fallout of priory machinations, denying the penchant prospecting company and returning the power and riches back to the people of the frontier city. Lysandra still had some wounds to heal, wounds of her own that she put to the side in order to achieve her vision for the future. Arriving through the portal, unannounced and amidst the whirl of snow in the elven city of Bientiorum, she wished to visit her now aging mother before that opportunity was lost forever. Asking around, she was startled to be directed to the Nightingale estate, an enormous compound of manor houses within a sprawling array of manicured gardens. Within was her wizened mother, softened by a life of luxury and plenty. She had married a lesser cousin and had many half-elven children, all of which had gone on to live lives of adventure and status within the city. Cinders of hurt and rage began to flare, seeing her mother in this way, how easily she had afforded love and family to others but not herself. But that was a different time, a different situation, bound and controlled by shadow. And so she bit her tongue, said her goodbyes and accepted her mother's apologies. Leaving the estate, she weighed up what was more hurtful, the second life of her mother, or how she was technically family to Ardwenavir. And so, the Lady of Shadow had truly come into her own. On her own terms and by her own hand, she would not be victim of her past hurts and betrayals, for without them she would never have the clarity or sense of purpose she wields to this day. And what happened to Lysandra at the end of her rule? Who knows? And we may never know. But one thing that can be said for certain, the world would never be the same again.
We cross now many years into the future, after Denis, the renowned chef of Nuadha, leaves the material plane and the mortal coil. An arcane portal shimmers into the afterlife, and walking through it, the Lady of Shadow and the timeless body of Feng emissary of Tuin. Before them, a small thatched cottage, smoke swirling into the sky and dancing among the trees of a quaint forest. Within, Lysandra and Feng hear the mirthful laughter of Denny and their old friend Louis, the Lady of Hermitage.
I think Feng just looks at Lysandra and says, "It's been a long time. Let's go say hi to our friends."
Let's go, you can lead the way.
And we walk into the cottage.
As they push open the door and enter into this small cottage, it's not much, but it is warm, it is inviting, all handmade wood and patched up clothes, scents of herbs and spices in the air from many a meal that's been cooked and shared. And as you move through into the kind of like kitchen dining area, you can see that Louis is sitting at a handmade like wooden dining table. A person that you don't quite know sitting at her side, holding her hand as they both kind of sip cups of tea. The atmosphere in here is joyful, and it's almost like a collective sigh of relief. And it finally feels like the moment where we all get to reunite after all our adventures, after all this time. You are welcomed home.
Denny is standing in the kitchen with his dad, and they're like making like a big soup together, and like his dad, weirdly enough, is actually like taking command of the scene. Denny and his dad have been separated for a while as well at this point, you know, they're mortal, and Denny is the sous chef in this moment, and I think the moment that he notices Feng and Lysandra coming in, he drops all of his stuff, and he just runs up to both of them and gives them a big hug. And says, "Bonjour, my friends, I've missed you so much. Let us take a silent moment for Pud. He is a construct and will never die."
It's on.
Pud is no more, unfortunately.
Oh, he'll carry our legacies, it'll be fine.
Put 47.
We got to a lot more Puds after you guys left.
69?
Yeah, Pud 69 we ended on.
Denny, you haven't changed a bit.
Lysandra sort of squats down to Denny's height and just holds him in a big hug. Same with Louis.
Yeah, Louis kind of is still in the afterlife, 5'1", so stands to greet her very, very tall friends, just with a small kind of like pat on the shoulder and a kiss on the forehead as she once again drags your heads down to her level, and she says, "There's enough chairs, there's enough food, there's enough drinks. How's it been?"
How much time you got?
We have forever.